You've got to make the judgment as to whether or not it's worth trying to have an interaction with somebody, and that takes wisdom.
You mentioned that, love isn't always popular and doesn't always feel good. And as in many times in the past, we're in a day and age when speaking out for Christ can carry a lot of consequences.
Say a little louder if you could, Nathan.
We're in a day and time, when speaking out for Christ can carry a lot of consequences.
Yes.
You mentioned speaking with boldness. Where does that boldness come from? How and when do you know when to speak up?
That's a great question. And isn't it interesting if you read the Proverbs, there's two Proverbs right next to one another. One says, answer a fool according to his folly. And the next one says, don't answer a fool according to his folly. And you're going, what are you supposed to do? Exactly. You've got to figure it out, right? Is this person going to be moved toward Jesus or away from their existing worldview by interacting with them? Or is that just going to drive them further away? Jesus said, right after he says, judge not lest you be judged, he says, don't cast your pearls before swine because they may turn on you and devour you. You've got to make the judgment as to whether or not it's worth trying to have an interaction with somebody, and that takes wisdom. Sometimes you should say something, other times you should not. And that's the reason I think asking questions is important. In fact, those 4 things I just mentioned you can do when somebody who's not interested. I said that you should pray, that you should love them, that you should plant seeds, and that you should wait. There's one other thing you can do, and that is ask a lot of questions. Because asking questions is not normally offensive. Making statements might be, but asking questions. So you might ask questions, well, why do you think that's true? Or why do you think all religions lead to God? Or why do you think the Bible has been corrupted? Or why do you think it's wrong to say, to prohibit abortion, or whatever the issue is? Ask them for why they believe what they believe, rather than trying to say, here's what I believe and you ought to believe it. Get them to try and defend their position. Because when somebody believes something, it's not your job to refute what they say, it's their job to support what they say. So ask a lot of questions. I think that might be the way forward. In fact, my friend Greg Koukl has a great little book called Tactics. I don't know if you've seen it, but it helps you converse with people. And Greg says there are 3 major questions you always have to have in ready to go. When somebody says something, like suppose someone were to say, I can't believe the Bible because it's been changed throughout the centuries. You probably heard that, right? You should ask 3 questions. The first question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's been changed throughout the centuries? Because chances are they don't even know what they mean, right? The second question to ask is, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what evidence do you have for that position? I can almost guarantee you, when you ask for evidence, they're not going to have it. In fact, if you want to customize, what do you mean by that? Or how did you come to that conclusion for that question? You can say, how did you come to that conclusion? Have you investigated the manuscript evidence for yourself? I can almost guarantee you the person isn't going to say, well, yeah, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts, right? Like, nobody's going to say that, right? What people believe largely in America today, they believe in slogans. They have all these slogans. They put them together in what they think is a coherent worldview, not knowing whether the slogans are really true or not, and not realizing that even if they were true, they'd be mutually contradictory. And so you need to call them on the evidence for the slogan. Oh, the Bible's been changed throughout the centuries. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? What evidence do you have for that? They're not going to have it. Then you can say, with the third question, after what do you mean by that and how'd you come to that conclusion, you can say, have you ever considered, and then add some evidence back. Like, have you ever considered, we didn't get the Bible like the telephone game that you might be thinking of, where one person heard it and passed it all around the room and it got all garbled. That's not how we got the Bible. We got the Bible because people who were there, or people who knew other people who were there, wrote down what happened, and then we've been able to copy those manuscripts over and over again, and by comparing the copies, we can reconstruct the original with more than 99% accuracy. Okay? So this is a good way for you to provide some evidence back. but always ask questions first. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, these questions you can use for any issue, not just Christianity, like parents. Suppose you get a call from your son in the middle of, late one night. He says, Dad, I'm not going to be home by 11 like you wanted me to. Don't panic. First question, what do you mean by that?
Great.
Second question, how'd you come to that conclusion? Okay. Third question, have you ever considered if you're not home by 11, you're grounded for 2 weeks? Be right home, Dad. By the way, husbands, never use these questions on your wife. Okay? Because if she calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? My wife will have a list 39 years long, all right? But remember those questions. They're in the book Tactics. They're also in our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examine. Download the app because there's a quick answer section in that answers common objections. So you might be having lunch with somebody, they say something, you don't know how to answer it, you go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? Right? You've got a question right there. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.